I have noticed a trend in the world of football that needs to be spoken about, and it is to do with our friends across the pond, maybe some of you who are watching this video, the US of A. You guys have recently discovered that football is a huge sport around the world, and recently this has then been followed up by content creators in the States now talking about football and football in a way that they do not understand. This video that I'm going to react to and break down and talk over and give my live reaction to give you more context as to what I think about what the information that is being presented here is talking about how apparently England's football league is ruining football as a sport. Now there's so much wrong with that sentence. And the Premier League is so huge. And not only that, football is a generational sport here in the UK and has been for a very long time. This is a sport that my country loves, has loved and has been a part of, regardless of what the information in this video may present to you. There is a lot of culture behind football, so I'm going to dive in now and see what this video is saying, because yes, you guys are now discovering football over there in the States, but this misinformation that may be given in this video I cannot allow. I saw it, I saw the title and I was like, by gosh, you do not understand football. So let's dive into it right now. The fact that you called us England's Football League, I mean, our Premier League, our main league here in the UK, the Premier League is full of international players as well. So already I'm like, come on now. So let's jump in. You don't understand already. Well, I'm going to jump in and see I'm going to give this video a chance, and also I'll be breaking it down. So let's have a watch now and see what's being said here, because I feel like there's a huge issue with those type of content creators and media sources over there, overseas, that are talking about football in this way and coming into the sport without actually knowing the whole picture. So let's dive in.
On February 3rd, 2023, in London, the English football club, Chelsea, played a home game against a rival, Fulham. The game ended in a scoreless draw, but Fulham's fans were so excited they stayed to chant after the game.
Which is what football does.
Soon, these words were in articles all over the world, because in just 1 month, Chelsea had spent €329 million on new players.
Euros.
All the clubs in the French, Italian, German, and Spanish football league spent combined.
Yes, that's how big it is.
Chelsea. And they think they can do everything. I mean, it's an extraordinary amount of money.
But it's what Chelsea's owners believed it needed to do in order to succeed in the most competitive, most popular, and richest football league in the world, the English Premier League.
The English Premier League needs some money.
That is correct, because the business side of football is also a part of the fascination for our country in terms of our fascination with football. So we pay attention to every transfer. We pay attention to every bit of spending. This is something that is a passion-rooted thing here in the UK. We are passionate about how the club is run, how the stands are built, why the stands are built. Every bit of football in terms of the players on the pitch down to the investments that are made are a part of the passion of the club, and this is what the fans also pay attention to. So the fact that there is a chant about this spending is not uncommon knowledge. It's not an uncommon thing in football. It's very well known in terms of football. Even back in like school days, and we're looking back at school days when we're looking back at, you know, how we used to talk about football in school, we're talking about this. Oh, do you know so-and-so was spent for so much? This is because there's a transparency in football, the sport. There's no hiding and willy-nilly, oh, we don't know what this club is doing. It's a part of the passion for football and your club that you support. So let's dive back in here, because that's part of the game. Transparency on what a club does with its spending is part of the game. Diving back in.
Just getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
The problem is that the Premier League's clubs have grown so rich that the rest of Europe can't keep up.
It's very difficult to be competitive against English clubs. It is so far ahead of all the other leagues.
Much like a lot of other sports are for different countries, it depends how much you put into the club and what happens as a result. So you've got to remember this is a generational sport here in the UK. The investment changes a city landscape. So in terms of, for example, let's talk about a really prestigious club, Manchester United. Manchester United also make investments in the city of Manchester, and it will change not only the work schedule of people in that city, and not only bring in people to visit the city and give you, the business owners or local business owners and so forth in the city, more revenue as a result. It feeds the city in a different way, and it changes, for example, travel plans. If you're traveling on a train in a specific area here in the UK and you've got a football stadium and it's a Saturday, you have to then think, is there a game on a Saturday? Because it's going to influence that travel schedule. It can also influence which journey you're taking on trains. So it's that big of a sport here in the UK. It is a grassroots culture in our country. Continue.
So how did the English Premier League get so rich? And how is that a problem for Europe's favorite sport?
I'm not even getting through this video, I can tell already. It's been like 5 minutes and I'm already dissecting this thing apart. Right, so in terms of you making a division between the UK and Europe, that is an incorrect way to look at the sport. As we've said, we make investments in La Liga, we make investments in different leagues, and they then come to the highest prestige league in the world, the Premier League. It's much like how United States have the NBA, but there are other different basketball leagues that don't get a single look in. So when you want to take and compare the two, basketball and football, really the Premier League gives more back to other football clubs in different leagues, as opposed to what the NBA might be doing, where if you look at our UK basketball teams, you don't even have to look into it, you can already tell. Too big to fail? It's a good thing. Let's see what else you got here.
Explaining how football works in Europe. Starting in England around the 1860s, people began organizing official football clubs and playing each other. Eventually, they divided.
Keep in mind, we don't call the Premier League the English League. It's not called the English League. It's not a league full of English players. Internationally, England plays. Just continue.
These clubs into a tiered system. The worst clubs played down in these leagues and the best up here. But clubs could move within this system. At the end of each season, the bottom two clubs in a league would be demoted to the league below.
Relegated.
And called relegation.
Yeah.
The top clubs would be promoted up.
It puts a competitive edge to everything.
This is James Corbett, a senior reporter at Off Pitch.
You know, effectively, you could have a village club that might be in tier 10 of English football, and if you do the right things, you know, they could be playing in the first division within a decade. You do
That's correct.
Fairy tale stories.
Wimbledon, 6th in the first division in their first season in the top flight.
On the verge of a football fairy tale.
By the mid-20th century, these five leagues in the biggest 5 countries had most of the best players, and therefore the best clubs. But every year, the best club from every league would play each other in a big tournament, at first called the European Cup.
The Euros,
It was an opportunity for clubs in any country to win big. In the 1980s, clubs from
like the Champions League, yes,
country leagues reached the semi-finals. And
trying to see where he's going with this.
Dutch and even a Romanian club won.
He's saved it again! And Romanians have won the European Cup!
I'm trying to see where he's going to try and make this divide here.
And it began in England with a tragedy.
Okay. Yes, there's been quite a few disasters actually.
People were injured and 96 killed at a game in Sheffield, England. When
I'm just going to skip over a little bit because it's going over a tragedy, and with YouTube itself, I know that's going to be a different, even though I'm reviewing the content that's actually originally here, I know that for my channel, it will be quite harshly striked. So I'm just going ahead slightly here. I know the incident. You can watch the original content to, find out more on this. So what I'll do is I'll also link it in the description so you can watch this original content as well. So let's go. Just skipping ahead a little bit. I'm going to skip over that.
Desperate to turn things around. Specifically, the owners of England's 5 richest
and
most
talking about
popular
motivation.
clubs.
Okay, so what he's done there is talking about motivation.
Tottenham Hotspur, Manchester United, Everton, and Liverpool.
the big clubs wanted a bigger share of.
Let's see where he's going with this.
Revenues, centralized marketing. You know, they saw the benefit of that in US sports, and essentially they saw an opportunity.
In 1992, they led a group of 22 clubs to break off and form a new league called the Premier League. They designed it to be English football's resurrection.
It's not English football. Why did he keep calling it that? It's not English football.
The Premier League served as the new top league in English football. It controlled its own TV rights, which it sold for 427 million euros to a satellite TV company.
But it's really annoying that he keeps calling it English football. Let me explain how a club structure works in grassroots. So you have your players that are from the country that will have a chance to be imported into a team. This might be the under, I think it's 25s, where you have your grassroots players that can come up into the main squad if they play for long enough and they're able to keep their level of football to that level, and they will have a chance to be in the reserves, and from the reserves they can play in the main 11 as they get older, as experienced footballers. But that does not influence who is playing on that main 11 team. Even though there is a chance that somebody that's playing in the under 11s, for example, may go up to the main squad one day, you then have the open market, let's call it an open market of players, the transfer windows, where the investors, the management team and so forth of a club will then invest in players to come into the team to give them the best chances of winning the league. Those are completely international players. They're paying fair money for those international players, and then you have to pay the salary of those international players. So just because a club has a lot of money in order to do that does not mean that the entire squad will be made up of English players or international players. It's literally down to if you can make that transfer, what player you can bring to your team to try and make your team the biggest and strongest squad you can possible. That's what goes forward for building an 11-a-side football team. So when he keeps calling it English football, you can have an English club that has no English players on it whatsoever, because you can make strong investments internationally, for example, from a La Liga club that brings La Liga fans to come and watch the Premier League. It's not called the English Premier League, it's called the Premier League. It's a Premier high-level playing football league. That's what it is. It just happens to be based in the UK, which is the reason why it's not called the English Premier League. I don't know why he keeps calling it the English Premier League. It's just that it's based and played in the UK. So what he's saying is more of like a haterism, kind of like he's trying to find a way to try and dismember the union of what football is in this country. We don't look at an international player from Portugal or Spain as a non-Chelsea player when they're playing on Chelsea that's come into the squad. They are a Chelsea player. They are a part of that 11-a-side. It's a huge part of the how football works here. It's an inclusive league. It's not an exclusive league. We don't exclude international players or players from other leagues into the league. That's not how it works. What the Premier League is an invitation for the best players to compete in the highest league possible. That's what the Premier League is. So already I'm really annoyed by watching this video. I don't like when people come into a sport without knowing how the sport works and they try to fabricate something. This feels like a huge fabrication, and I'm having to condense my hands to try and keep myself from getting too emotional with what's going on here, because I do have a passion for football. I played football ever since I was a young kid. I was named after football players that were not English players, by the way. They were international players that used to play for English squads and English teams. So let's dive back in.
Cash that the clubs then used to find new ways to make.
What I mean by named after football players, I mean like when I used to play football back in my younger days, like there was a lot of teachers and so forth that used to name me football players because I used to play like them, so yeah, that's
money and modernize the game. They renovated and built new stadiums that could fit more fans, and they started selling sponsorships and merchandise all over the world. Mm-hmm. But it was satellite TV that made
it was gigsy though,
allowing the games to be broadcast to new audiences like in the US and Asia. The Premier League was able to more than double the price for its rights in 1997 and again in 2001.
It is one of the great success stories in global sport.
That's right, that's correct.
The Premier League divided its TV revenue relatively equally between clubs, which made them more competitive. Spain, Italy, and Germany all gave more TV money to its most successful clubs. which led a few
Barca,
year
Juventus,
after
AC
year.
Milan, Inter Milan,
By
Bayern Munich.
2004, the Premier League had successfully turned English football around, becoming the wealthiest.
When you keep saying that, it's really annoying.
Very rich people were noticing. Hey, I'm Sam Ellis, and welcome to Search Party. I'm gonna really quickly say thank you to today's sponsor, Incogni.
I'll just skip his sponsor placement. So he's got a sponsor placement in there as well. I see what he's trying to do here in the division he's trying to make in football, but it's not a divisive sport like that. So it looks like he hasn't grown up watching football and doesn't understand. So I'm just providing more context for those of you who might be coming in and learning about this sport, even though it's been a huge sport for many, many generations here in this country. So I can't allow disinformation like this. So he's taking how the league has how the league has grown as a negative, and it's not a negative. Like I said, it's an inclusive sport, and I've talked about why and how it is an inclusive sport as well. So imagine if the NBA actually done that. Imagine if the NBA, I'm using the NBA as an example because it's predominantly, from what I can see, American athletes that compete in the NBA. I have not even heard of. I think I've got like a teacher that from back in the day that played in the NBA, got injured, and that was it. I can't even pick an English basketball player out from the NBA. I can't name one. I can't name one that played at a high level, and I cannot name any. Let's say Europeans. That's to make a comparison to this video. I can't name any European players that have played in the NBA, or even like American football. So if you want to make this argument, you've got to make the comparison to what this person is saying, and I'm like, there's no comparison. In the NBA, there would be no Cristiano Ronaldo. Cristiano Ronaldo is not an English player. He's Portuguese, but and he played for Manchester United and made a huge name for himself at Manchester United, which is an English club. Didier Drogba is French. He made his name at Chelsea. And the list goes on. The list can go on and on and on. Zidane, is like you can go on and on and on. Cantona, I'm not just Cantona. You can go on and on between which players came to where and did what. Like there's a lot of high prestigious names that you can pick out right there. So let's jump back in, man.
Roman Abramovich. He's a Russian businessman who, back in 2003, was worth almost 10 billion euros.
Okay.
And he wanted to buy a football club. He settled on a West London club named Chelsea, which was in deep financial trouble. He paid around 199 million euros for the club and to relieve its debt, then immediately injected millions more of his own money to buy almost a dozen excellent players from clubs.
I mentioned mainly French players just as well, so
even while the club
just to give an idea,
he added more.
That's the big moment because he came in and he had.
It's picking on the owners now, isn't it?
Just beyond anything that the Premier League had ever seen.
Chelsea quickly won the Premier League in 2005 and 2006 and began consistently qualifying for and advancing deep into the All-European tournament, since renamed the Champions League. Abramovich proved that you could buy success in the Premier League, and it encouraged other owners to try it for themselves.
Because you're investing more investments you have.
Wealthy and mostly foreign owners began buying and pumping millions into Premier League clubs. It helped that at first the Premier League had very few rules on who could buy a club and how much they could spend on it.
The Premier League has always been sort of quite non-interventionist. Any investment is investment.
So these owners began making the already rich clubs richer, while others boosted some smaller clubs into notoriety. Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan was a member of oil-rich Abu Dhabi's royal family.
Okay.
In 2008, bought Manchester City.
Yeah,
it's just got
moved it up another.
It's just got into a realm.
The resources, not just the wealth, but the resources of a nation state.
He spent over 1.7 billion euros over the next 15 years on the best players, coaches, staff, and facilities from all over Europe.
Isn't that what you would do?
And of course, it worked.
You're making investments. What? As I said, it's a part of the sport.
This strategy helped spark an arms race in the 2010s. Clubs started spending more and more each year to sign the best.
This argument could be made for any sport. if you've got investments in the best equipment, if you've got investments in the best physiotherapists, if you've got investments in the best recuperation facilities, then of course your players are going to have a better chance of those advantages that will help them on the pitch on game day. So that happens with anything. Like if you've got the best nutritionalists, if you've got the best resources available to you, you are going to become better. Right, so you're going to be a better side. Like it's going to help you and have those advantages. And this argument comes from raw talent, training, and there's also investment. So investment can help that raw talent and your training. So whatever the argument here is, works for any sport. And if you've got a squad that is already doing well and you invest more, it's going to grow, it's going to bloom, it's going to flourish. The only time where it actually won't is when you've got like a passion issue. If you've got like somebody who just doesn't want to play the game, you've got all these things and you've got no passion there, and it's not going to grow and flourish because the person doesn't want to play for the team anymore, or the fans don't want to support for whatever reason. Like there's a difference here. So you're joining the football debate, so let's call it. You're joining the football debate, but on a much later date. So you're missing some key details of the passion behind the game. So the more passion that's there, the more people want to watch sports, the more people want to enjoy football, the more there's going to be people that are going to come in because there's more eyes on the product and they're going to want to invest in that product. So if you want to bring it down to a business point of view, that's how that works. For example, gaming community. If you're playing games, if your game is not, has any sponsorships throughout the game, you know that those sponsorships have come from a deal and acquisition from the creators, the developers, or the who's in charge of the game and the brand. So if Nike is involved in a football game, for example, or a non-football game, then you know that Nike have approached them or they've had a deal and an acquisition meeting and they've been like, you have so many eyes on your product, we think that our brand fits your product, let's have that acquisition, let's have that conversation. That's how the owners will think about when they're buying a club. They'll be like, well, okay, you have so many fans, so many seats in fans in seats, you have so many viewers online or offline or on normal centralized television. This is what I want to do with the club. This is what I want to invest in. This is my dreams and my proposition, as well as buying and making that acquisition. And that's what that is. That happens with everything. So with like literally anything. Like, so if you want to know how the world works in terms of brand product placement, do you get what I mean? Or an acquisition of an owner buying a club. It's that's just straightforward, isn't it?
Players and keep up with each other. While many of the rich clubs could afford to lose money on expensive players, many smaller clubs couldn't.
It created huge inflationary pressure, not just in terms of transfer fees, but in terms
it's common sense, isn't it? Well, it's not common sense actually, but it's
under the feet of other clubs.
And it became harder.
Well, yeah, it does. Yeah, it's going to make clubs
the Premier League to afford to stay there.
Clubs have massively overspent.
Well, not afford to stay there. There's a difference.
In 2013, the Premier League.
I'm glad I've just explained what I've just explained.
Clubs to break even, but they didn't slow down the spending because these clubs were in a lucrative cycle. As wealthy owners spent millions to bring the best players to the Premier League, more fans, especially international ones, wanted to watch it, which generated more TV money.
That's correct, yes.
Clubs more money to spend on more players. By 2022, the Premier League had 11 of the 20 richest football clubs in the world. And as far as revenue, the Premier League clubs brought in over $3 billion.
Man United isn't the richest right now.
In Spain's top leagues, and more than double France and Italy's. So by 2023, the Premier League was on a spending spree that Europe's other clubs just couldn't match. Something Chelsea made obvious in 2023.
Transfer deadline day, and Chelsea have locked down a British record transfer
spending of $357 million in January. La Liga
I mean, this did used to have like a negative effect on the fan base.
Market.
So I want to see where this the direction he takes here on this argument that he's making.
The Premier League's ever equal by...
I've got my coffee.
By 2023, Europe's other leagues generated far less television money than the Premier League. But they also had more rules. Germany blocked ultra-wealthy owners.
I mean, you're also forgetting which media sources actually report on it as well. So you have some high prestigious media sources that cover the Premier League, right? So, and they always will. Like, they're not going to let go of football. And not only that, we have that grassroots as well in terms of football. So it's a huge part of our culture over here in the UK, much like it is in some other European countries like you're talking about here, Germany and Spain, France. Football's huge there as well. There's also other parts of the world that are into football that are not mentioned here. So I want to see if he goes to a certain place here. So let's have a look.
From taking over its clubs, and Spain's league placed strict spending limits on its clubs. It often made these clubs healthier financially, but put most of them at a huge disadvantage when bidding for players against Premier League clubs. Like
That's right. Chelsea. So you've missed out a huge part of the story there. You've missed out on reasons of why that was done.
Had bought Chelsea, decided to splurge on new players, and were prepared to pay huge prices in order to outbid the other Premier League clubs.
Other interventions between spending reasons
Portugal's league
is nothing to do with the Premier League.
One in Ukraine's, plus millions more for another 6 players, totaling 329 million euros. That's more money than the annual revenue of most European clubs. So Chelsea got these players, and while its spending was extreme, even the worst Premier League clubs were outbidding Europe's major clubs. Southampton bought 5 players, including one from France for 25 million euros, and Bournemouth bought 3 players, including one for nearly 23.
But then you're also missing the fact that when these players go to play internationally, you might start watching those international teams where you wasn't previously watching them before. So, you know, Park Ji-sung, you know, you probably wouldn't be watching. I'm going to make sure I know which nationality Park Ji-sung is, just to make sure. I'm just giving an example here, but I want to make sure I get it right. Park Ji-sung is South Korean. So you might not be watching a South Korean football team, but you might watch a South Korean football team because Park Ji-sung is playing on the squad. Do you get what I mean? I had to search there. That's testament to what I'm saying. So I probably wouldn't have watched the international South Korean football team, but I would if Park Ji-sung was playing on the team because I know of that player. Do you get what I mean? So when an international player is also coming to a Premier League club, it's also helping their leagues and their international team as well. Because you might find another player as a result of watching Park Ji-sung. Do you get what I'm saying there? So there's a lot of that. I mean, there's some leagues that I would like to see more of just because there's a player that has moved from a Premier League and gone back home to his national teams. So there's also that benefit as well of players coming to the Premier League. The Premier League is the biggest football league in the world, but I won't let somebody put a bad name on the Premier League and get away with it like this without that information being given. So I'm going to continue to watch here because I'm still dissecting, I'm still soaking in everything that this guy's saying. I'm giving him a fair chance before I say these things.
3 million euros from Ukraine.
About 3/4 away through
Premier
now.
League clubs are buying up nearly all Europe's best players, and
that's correct.
Clubs can't afford to stop them.
I know exactly.
That's how it works.
What, by any measure, I would consider big clubs and say Germany. They're very, very frustrated because every year they lose their best players to an English club.
Yeah.
Some already rich and successful clubs in Europe are trying to match the Premier League spending. But it's caused Spain's Barcelona to spiral into a debt crisis, and Italy's Juventus was caught fudging its accounting.
We need to work on grassroots.
Europe's other clubs, meanwhile, are increasingly choosing to sell their best young players to Premier League clubs, meaning it's harder than ever for them to compete. You can see it happening most clearly.
I mean, also, you got to remember that when you're selling a player for such a large amount, that gives you more spending power. So if you wanted to make a transfer to your club, you could potentially have more of an opportunity to do that. So it does actually give you the motivation to build your grassroots players up to the point of being able to be sold for a really high amount, because then you're actually making your club stronger as a result, giving yourself more spending power. Like, again, this is like common sense way of how to build up your club. If you've got a grassroots player that you've built from a child, because that's how football works. You can have a player that's played for you since they were 11 or under 11 years old. That is a Ronaldinho that makes it up into your club and makes a name for himself. Or you have then the motivation to build up your grassroots players. So you have those players that will be worth quite a lot to a Premier League team. What does that then do for your squad? It gives you more spending power because you have then built a player up to go to the highest league in the world. Not only does that give your grassroots more of an appeal, but it also gives you that money that's been that player that's been sold for that much in the first place. So it's a win-win situation there. Like I said, they're looking at the Premier League from an international point of view. So I'm giving a full scope on that, as opposed to it's just English. No. It's not just English. There are international players that benefit, and their other squads and leagues benefit as a result of coming to the Premier League. Much like, as I'll say it again, the NBA could be in this way.
In the Champions League tournament. Remember back in the 80s when clubs from 16 different countries made it?
You left the Champions League for
the
that.
past
for the
10 years,
point.
it was just 6. And only these 6 clubs have won it. Playing in a major Champions League match earns a club millions. So when it's dominated by a handful of rich teams, they get even richer.
There's a reason behind how the Champions League works.
That significant European leagues, it is gradually forced them out.
This runaway wealth imbalance
There's
is
a reason
why a
it's
few
like
rich
that.
clubs, including 6 from the Premier League, tried to break away and form their own Super League back in 2021. An outcry by fans forced them to abandon the plans, but
Well, it's completely left a key piece of information out there. When in terms of the Champions League and how it works, for those of you who don't know, the top teams from the league at the end of season will then have a chance to compete in the Champions League. So if you're winning your league and you're at the top of that, the Premier League, for example, the top high prestigious leagues that you have in your international leagues, then those teams then go to compete with the other top teams from around the world. That's how that works. So it's nothing to do with you spending as much. Yes, you have those high investment players and those players that you can bring into your squad, making your squad stronger. But if you're able to bring yourself up to that level and you're able to get to the top of the league because you've played at the top of the league and you're in the top 3, I think it is, then you will have the chance to go to the Champions League as well. So the reason why this correlates and the spending correlates with those teams that are at the top is because you're able to get to those top players, but you can work your way up to that position. It genuinely can have nothing to do with your spending if you manage to get some players that are absolutely outstanding and defeating those top player teams. Remember, you have a whole season to get to the top of the league, a whole entire season. It's not just 1 or 2 games, and you're not just playing those top high spending teams in your league as well. So think about that as well. There is an opportunity to get to the Champions League playing consistently at the best of the league.
problem didn't go away.
We talk in terms of European Super Leagues, but the reality is the Premier League is the European Super League.
Oh, mad.
The Premier League has announced that it plans to install stricter rules that limit what clubs can spend on players.
Okay.
And it might be starting to enforce its rules better. In February 2023, the Premier League charged Manchester City with more than 100 violations of its financial rules, stretching back as far as 2009.
Yeah, there was an issue there.
Guilty, it could be
Apparently.
relegated. But restricting spending
we're
could
going to
just
be
make
relegated.
the advantage the rich clubs already have. It's the Premier League's past willingness to let anyone own a club harder to fix.
Once you've opened yourself up to a nation state buying into your organisation, very, very difficult.
Oh no, they're going at that. He's aiming at Man City.
Manchester City completely.
He's aiming at Man City.
And I'm not sure that it can be done.
This is a problem here.
And that's the first episode of Search Party. Hope you liked it.
Right, okay, so Search Party there. I have a few gripes with what he said here and what he's saying about the Premier League. Some points were valid, so there were some valid points there that he was making in terms of like the spending restrictions and so forth that he's saying is an issue. But I don't, as I said, I think I've made my points very clear and my counter arguments here on what he said in these points on terms of the Premier League. He's very much anti-English, right? And I find that a problem, and I've noticed that in terms of football, because you know the Premier League, the way Americans see the Premier League as an English league, they are very anti-English football because you know coming from an outsider into the sport isn't something that Americans are used to in terms of sport. You guys have the you guys have the NBA, the NFL, the NHL. You know, there's 3 leagues there, 3 types of sports that you guys normally own, and you don't have a huge footprint in football. And I understand that this can make you feel inferior in terms of competition wise, but you're more than welcome. And when football is so inclusive. I mean, I noticed it back when the World Cup was on, and we were up against the States, and how the banter was online. There was a type of underdog feeling from the States. Now, it doesn't have to be this way at all, which is the reason why a lot of older players are going to the States more. You have some really strong international female women's players as well in the States, and there's a lot more opportunity for the States to make a footprint in football. But the Premier League has been, and in my opinion will always be, the strongest league in the world, and there's a reason for that, and there's a history behind it that is rooted in football and fair competition. Now, these arguments are based on unfair competition in terms of spending. Now, I can understand some of the spending things that you're going on about, but I'm making those comparisons to the sports that are American dominated, and there's not much difference or space to make the argument. That's the reason why I mentioned the NBA, the NFL, NHL. There's not much space there because football is more inclusive than those sports. The NFL could be so much more bigger here in the UK. It's just like when, the Vikings come to play, I can't name any English players that could play on that team. There could be more States players that are able to play in the Premier League. That opportunity is more than there for that to happen. But in terms of the opposite way around, I don't see it. So, I've never looked at the NBA as an American league. Yes, it's American dominated, but I've never looked at it as an American league. And he's looking at the Premier League like a English league, and that's my counter argument here. That's not how we perceive the Premier League. It's just that it's played here in the UK, has been, always will be. There's a reason for that. And it comes with the travel, and it comes with the history, and it comes with those grassroots that have been there for generations. So that's part of the Premier League. So yeah, that's my counter argument here. I had to watch this because I saw the title and I was like, So that's my counter argument, just to give you some more information. I didn't want any misinformation out there in terms of football, especially when it's huge in this country, and there's a reason for it, and I have a passion for it as well. I will be having a look more into the NBA. I mean, I don't want to make a counter argument and start talking about the NBA in this way, because I don't have that. I'm not competing in that way. Like, that's it. The argument is very nationalist, and it's like that's not how we see the Premier League. But yeah, I've made my points. I'm gonna keep rambling, so I'm gonna end it here. Thanks for watching my counter argument to this video. Just thought I'd make some points there that needed to be mentioned, and yeah. So thanks for watching, man, and see you in the next one. Peace, Anthony Allen. There's more where that came from.